Welcome back to the Catalyst Cooking Show. I'm J.R. Forsteros, and this is my sister-in-law, Amanda Conan. We call ourselves the Outlaws because she is married to my wife, Amanda's brother. So we're the other ones. Yeah. Also, Amanda is a fantastic cook, and so since she's visiting Texas, we decided we would smoke some meats. For this episode of the Catalyst Cooking Show. So welcome. I know you didn't plan to be on camera for this, but this is exciting. So we are cooking a brisket. We have a pork shoulder here, which is also called a pork butt, even though it is the shoulder of the pig. I honestly don't know why they call it a butt.
I don't either.
And then we have a rack of ribs here. We've already pulled off the membrane, so we're just going to be loading them up. I'm going to have to trim the fat off of this brisket. And so while I'm doing that, Amanda is going to put this rub, which was actually a gift from Leroy and Elizabeth Sims, so thank you, Sims, on the shoulders. We're going to use mustard because the secret thing no one knows about mustard, a lot of people know it, I don't know, but you may not know about mustard, is that it actually, the flavor all cooks out when you cook it like we're going to do. So it does a really good job of holding the rub to the meat without actually making the whole thing taste like mustard. So while Amanda starts to do that, I'm going to start carving the fat. You can see this brisket has a good chunk of fat on it, so we want to get as much of that off as possible, leave about 1/4 of an inch of fat for when we actually put it on the smoker. Barbecue as a cuisine has a really interesting history. It started actually, as far as we can tell, on the island that we now today call Hispaniola, the island that has Haiti and the Dominican Republic on it. And it was started as a way for people who were disadvantaged and oppressed to figure out good ways to cook the cuts of meat that they were given, that they could afford. So the two major cuts that are the most famous in smoking are the pork shoulder or the pork butt. I don't know why it's called a pork butt. And then also the brisket. And both of those pieces of meat have fat running all through them. They're very, very, very fatty pieces of meat. So if you cook them quickly, like say you throw them in the oven at 350 degrees or something like that, the fat inside of the meat basically crystallizes and turns into rubber bands, and that's why you feel like you're chewing the meat hard. It's not a pleasant dining experience. But again, the folks who had only this option reminds me actually a lot of last week when Sonia was talking about the Navajo tacos and how those came out of, they were birthed out of sort of a place of oppression and creativity, right? A creative response to oppression. The people who lived on Hispaniola figured out a way to make it taste great, and they did that by cooking the meat at a much lower temperature. So the mantra of barbecue is low and slow. You want to cook the meat at a very low temperature, usually between 225 and 275 degrees, and then you cook it for a really long time. And the reason that happens, the reason you do that is because when you cook the meat that way, the fat inside of the meat basically begins to melt. And you can actually see this if you look at a temperature chart of a brisket. Usually you put a thermometer in the brisket and you can chart it as it's cooking. What you see is when you first put the brisket on the smoker, its internal temperature starts rising until it hits somewhere between 160 and 180 usually. And then at that point the meat the temperature stops rising and it flatlines. Barbecue pitmasters call this the stall because nothing's happening, at least to our senses. what's actually happening though is all of the fire, or all of the heat, the energy from the fire is being now converted into energy to melt that fat that goes all through the meat. And then as soon as that process is finished, the internal temperature of the brisket or the pork shoulder starts rising again. And so that's when the meat's done. That's when you want to pull it off. It's a really interesting approach to meat, and it's one that transforms these otherwise barely edible cuts into some of the most desired kinds of meat on the planet. As you can imagine, that technique spread quickly from the island of Hispaniola up into the Americas. It came up into Florida and up into the East Coast, which is why North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida are kind of the first American hub for barbecue. And then eventually, the cooking method made its way down to Texas. Texas took the cooking methods that were so popular with pork and applied those to cattle, and that's why Texas is so well known for its beef. So that's what I love about barbecue. I love that it is a food that tells a story, and it tells a story of resistance and of creativity in the face of real oppression. It's also, again, that low and slow mentality. It's something that you cannot rush. There is scientifically no way to replicate the slow, low process of barbecue.